Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. So, welcome everyone to the 2025 ALAO Special Collections and Archives Interest Group Workshop, Preserving the Past, Transforming the Future, Expanding Access and Representation in Archival Work. We're so glad to have you all here today. My name is Candace Pine, and I'm here with my fellow SCAIG co-chair, Christine. Also, just as a quick side note, I am going to be rotating off as a co-chair soon, so nominations are currently open for new co-chairs, so please reach out if you're interested in that. All right, and before we get started, I just want to go over a few logistics for our webinar today. So first, we'd like to remind you that all attendees are expected to follow the ALAO Code of Conduct. And we're also going to have all of our attendees remain muted with their cameras off just throughout the workshop to help preserve bandwidth and prevent any accidental background disruptions. And live captions should be available now if you want them, but please let us know if you experience any trouble with getting those going. We can help troubleshoot that for you. Also, the webinar is being recorded, so a link to the recording is going to be sent to everyone who registered for the event once that is available. And then finally, please put any questions you have for our presenters in the Q&A box. Other comments can go into the chat, but we're going to be prioritizing questions from the Q&A to relate to all of our speakers. And we're going to be using progressive stacking today. So that means that anyone who identifies with a marginalized or underrepresented group can place an asterisk in front of their question, and we will prioritize asking those questions first. And then helping us out with our chat and Q&A today are the two other members of our workshop planning committee. So there's Kate, she's the special collections librarian at Kent State University. And then there's Erin, who is currently an MLIS student at the University of South Florida, but she's based here in Athens, Ohio. A huge thank you to both Erin and Kate for all of your assistance and with all of the planning and participating in this workshop. And then I also need to give a shout out to Leticia Wiggins. She is the one of the web managers for ALAO. She's assisting us. She set up this whole event for us and is here today to help keep everything running in the background. So we really appreciate all of your help and support. And that's going to be all from me for now. I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Christine.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Christine Leibson, and I'd like to take a moment to give a quick overview of our interest group to anyone that may not be familiar with us. The purpose of the Special Collections and Archives Interest Group of ALAO is to provide a forum for discussing and sharing issues and developments that are pertinent to special collections and archives in Ohio academic libraries. And we are bringing you this annual workshop as an example of an opportunity for us to gather as academic library professionals and learn about both changing and continuing practices in our field. We are thrilled to present our lineup and speakers for today, starting with a short spotlight on a recent publication that supports our workshop theme this year. From interrogation to integration, Centering Social Justice in Special Collections, Archives, and Preservation. The editors of this volume, Kim Hoffman and Rachel Makarowski, are here with us today. Our first two speakers contributed to this volume that they edited and will be discussing projects that each of their chapters are based on. Our first presentation will come from Vanessa Formato, who will be presenting Who We Remember, Reflections on the Uncovering the Diverse History of Massachusetts Eye and Ear Project. Then next up will be Ian Post presenting Bridging Barriers to Accessibility of Sources on Delmarva's Black History through the Enduring Connections Digital History Project. And our third speaker will be Jocelyn Robinson, who will be presenting Lifting Every Voice, Preserving Black College Radio in an Era of Erasure. As a final note, we'll be pausing after each presentation to allow time for questions. And if we have extra time at the very end, we will be opening things up for questions to all presenters. So I'll turn things back over to Candace.
All right. So first up, we are thrilled to be able to spotlight from interrogation to integration, centering social justice in special collections, archives, and preservation. So I'm going to go right ahead and turn things over to Kim and Rachel and let them tell you about their new book.
Thank you so much for inviting us to give a little tiny introduction to our book and for giving us the space to speak about this as a state chapter during the times that we live in. My name is Rachel Makarowski. As stated, I'm the Special Collections Librarian at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. So I'm actually right next door to Candace at the moment. And I am one of the co-editors of this volume.
And hello, my name is Kim Hoffman. I am the Digital Curation and Preservation Librarian at Hamilton College, which is in central New York, in Clinton, if you're familiar with the area. And before moving to central New York, I was actually the preservation librarian at Miami University. So that's my Ohio connection. And I'm one of the co-editors of the book as well.
So how everything got started for us was all the way back 5 years ago in 2020, as not only we as a profession were attempting to reconcile everything that had happened, but also personally trying to figure out what we could do. So that actually started as just a self-reflection between myself and Kim about how we were prioritizing items for um, instruction purposes, preservation, and really just figuring out how we could be better accomplices through our daily work and actions as professionals. It wasn't enough to just think good thoughts. We really wanted something that was actionable. So from this, we started thinking about, if we're having these questions, other people might. So we started going to different conferences and having facilitated discussions so that we could group think to solve problems and help really lighten that intellectual load by sharing knowledge with each other. And so many people were really enthusiastic in their response to these discussions that there was really a clear need that we needed to capture what people were doing so that it could be better shared with everyone because not everyone can attend conferences easily. So that started our journey in making the book.
So I had to look at my notes to remember this. We put out the call for chapter proposals in September of 2022. So this has really been a multi-year labor of love for us and for all of our contributors. And the result is the work of 37 chapter authors and co-authors, just a really incredible group of colleagues who contributed to this volume. It was amazing to work with all of them. What they've done here, they're collected case studies, questions, research projects, insights, really are an attempt to create a more equitable, just, diverse, and inclusive profession for all of us. But at the same time, they really acknowledge the complexity of this work and sometimes the difficulty of this work. We, in particular, wanted to focus on case studies that highlight steps that we can all take to work social justice into the daily tasks that are already a part of our jobs, because it can be difficult to tackle these big questions when so many of us are short-staffed or dealing with other types of obstacles. And along those lines, we also wanted to avoid highlighting projects where possible that were entirely grant funded, because that's one more obstacle, and that can be too much extra time for some folks to apply for those grant projects. So the hope is that readers find these projects both inspiring and really accessible and achievable. So these many chapters we've organized into 5 sections: research, description, outreach, preservation and access, and instruction. In the research section, our contributors grapple with reframing their collections or taking a deeper dive into their content. And that's actually where you'll find the work spotlighted here today. In the description section, we present 3 examples of reparative description projects that we hope will serve as examples for institutions who would also like to undertake that work. The preservation and access chapter focuses on diverse approaches to making sure that this content is accessible for the long term, whether that means captioning and transcription, or a crowdsourced catalog using linked data, or painstaking conservation and collection efforts in the wake of a tragedy. The outreach section focuses on connecting professionals to one another, whether that's lesson plans, partnerships, campus initiatives, donor relations, or fellowships. And finally, the instruction section, which is our largest section, is really stories from the trenches of working directly with students using primary source material in the classroom.
So with all of that in mind, of course, we would love for you to purchase the book, especially if it's for your institution where other folks might be able to view it. But we also understand that, you know, the entire book might not apply directly to your work. So we want to also invite you to check out the institutional repositories of our chapter authors, as a number of them have made their chapters available for free in that way. If there's a particular section that you're interested in, please reach out to either myself and Kim, and we're happy to provide you with a list of authors who contributed to that specific section. We also want to note that this book is not some ultimate compilation of everything that there is to know about how to center social justice in your daily work, but rather we really intend it to be an entry point. It captures only some of what is going on, and we know and recognize that there are many more people who are doing this good work. So we're looking forward to continuing this conversation over the coming years and learning from our colleagues in the profession. Thank you.
All right, so thank you so much, Rachel and Kim, for telling us a little bit about your book. I did put a link to it there in the chat if anybody wants to go and check that out right now. But we also can take a moment if anyone has any questions that they want to ask Rachel and Kim. You know, feel free to go ahead and do that. We, like I said before, we can put questions into our Q&A, and you know, if you don't think of anything right now in the moment, but you think of something later, still feel free to put that in the Q&A, and we can circle back to that later on. But I just want to give everyone a moment to go ahead and put in any thoughts or questions that they have right now. So we'll give you just a second if anybody's typing. There's nothing so far that I am seeing. So we will go ahead and keep moving forward. We're going to be hearing from Vanessa next. So Christine?
Yes, so now we'll hear from Vanessa Fermato, who is the archivist for the Abraham Pollen Archives of Massachusetts Eye and Ear in Boston. She is an active member of New England Archivists, where she has served in several roles, including as co-chair of the newsletter committee. In 2023, she was appointed to serve on the Northeast Document Conservation Center's advisory committee. Vanessa earned her BA from Clark University and her MLIS from Simmons University. And today she's going to be presenting Who We Remember, Reflections on the Uncovering the Diverse History of Massachusetts Eye and Ear project. Take it away, Vanessa.
Great, thank you so much. Oh, there we go. Perfect. All right, so hopefully everyone's seeing that. Thank you for the introduction, and thanks so much for having me today. So I'm excited to share with you a little bit about uncovering the diverse history of Massachusetts Eye and Ear, what the project is, some of our project outcomes, and some takeaways that I hope you can apply to your own work, especially those among us who are working on smaller teams. So I want to start off with a brief introduction to Mass Eye and Ear for those who may not be familiar. Mass Eye just celebrated our 200th anniversary. We were founded as the Boston Eye Infirmary in 1824 by Doctors John Jeffries and Edward Reynolds, with the goal of providing Boston's poor with free eye care. The hospital quickly became and continues to be a training ground and magnet for leaders in ophthalmology and otolaryngology, head and neck surgery, which is basically ear, nose, and throat. Also important to note is that Mass Eye and Ear is a Harvard teaching hospital, and our relationship with Harvard extends back almost to our founding in the early 1800s. Our library, the Howe Library, was established a little more than 100 years ago, or 100 years later, rather, as a Harvard library. So in the latter part of 2020, we first became aware of Harvard Library's Advancing Open Knowledge Grants program, which was seeking to fund projects that advance open access to knowledge and foster innovation to further diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and anti-racism. There are a few reasons that this grant really appealed to us. For one, we had recently been approached by an investigator in our lab. Well, I'm just checking if I am on the right slide here. So we had been approached by an investigator in one of our labs who had expressed an interest in the library really helping to surface more information about people of color and women in the history of Mass Eye and Ear. Dr. Sunil Puria not only inspired us to pursue this project, but he provided essential support to us in the grant writing stage, and for that we're really grateful. At the time we learned about the grant, the Abraham Pollen Archives was being managed by a part-time Lone Ranger, which is me, with the support of library staff of only 2 and a single volunteer. The AOK grant was designed to support projects that could be completed in 6-month chunks and had what we felt like were manageable reporting requirements. We had definitely looked into other grants in the past, and it has, as has always already been mentioned, just felt like they would be too much for a staff of our size to reasonably handle. Harvard's grant team also expressed a real openness to exploration with the grant and flexibility with the outcomes. So we felt confident going in that we could design a project that would be successful for all parties. It also didn't hurt that with a bicentennial looming, we saw this as a great opportunity to get prepared for an influx of requests related to this aspect of our history, and also raise general awareness of the archives itself. So why engage in this work at all? In a 2011 article that I think about quite a lot, Terry Cook, reflecting on how archival silences are created and perpetuated, wrote that, quote, "If we are what we keep, then following human nature, we generally keep what we are most comfortable with, what we know, what our social and educational backgrounds made us who we are." Our archives are in fact not neutral spaces, shaped as they are by many systemic barriers present in the archival profession and in the communities that archives strive to document. As a medical archivist, I often encounter silences in our collections that can be difficult to confidently make sense of, much less to fill. Systemic racism and misogyny are impossible to separate from the history of medicine, as they have profoundly affected everything from patient access to healthcare to individuals' access to medical education. For clinicians from traditionally underrepresented backgrounds, the barriers they encounter early in their educations and training often follow them throughout their careers, making it less likely that they will be selected for leadership roles or receive broader recognition for their work. Over time, it becomes increasingly challenging to determine if a lack of records about women and people of color within our collections is because they weren't there or because their presence wasn't documented. These gaps in our records and in our knowledge shape our collective memory and limit the stories we're able to tell about our past, our present, and our future. So basically, uncovering the diverse history of Massachusetts Eye and Ear would aim to identify and research women and people of color who have been part of that legacy and amplify their stories, starting with this deep dive into existing collections. So funding from the AOK grant project would support dedicated research to identify the names of women and people of color who were the first in their subspecialties or roles at Mass Eye and Ear, as well as those who have made significant contributions to Mass Eye and Ear and or the medical field writ large. In the process, we would tap into Harvard Library resources that we didn't previously have access to, including archive space, Alma, which is their cataloging software, and their digital repository service to make collections related to our research more discoverable by researchers and the general public. We also had the goal of all of this building toward the creation of an online exhibit using Harvard's Curiosity platform. So we ended up learning in early 2021 that our project had been accepted as part of the grant's inaugural cohort, and we started right into the work of the project. So what I thought I would focus on here is I want to give you an idea of how the research portion played out through a bit of a case study. It's also an example of how valuable our photograph collections and annual reports in particular were throughout this process. So one of the things we were really confident about going into the project was that of all the things we knew the answer to one question. Who was the first woman surgeon at Mass Eye and Ear? This was a woman named Maud Carville, an ophthalmologist in 1923. It quickly became apparent that the answer to this question was a bit more complicated than we'd previously known. We stumbled across some material written by a previous archivist that referenced the two photos you're seeing here, one from 1909 and one from 1911. You'll notice several women surgeons in the two photos. They're the women who are not wearing the hats. The hats indicate a nurse. The note, both of these photos, predate Dr. Carville's appointment. And the note sort of left this at, a funny little thing that someone should look into someday. And given the time that we had and the resources we had, we decided to do that. So how did we start actually untangling this mystery? Fortunately, these photos include not only the dates they were taken, but the physician's signatures written on the board behind them. In the case of the 1909 photo, we spent a lot of our time actually trying to match up names with individuals so we could narrow down which of the names likely belonged to the woman surgeon shown. This involved a lot of cross-referencing with our annual reports. This was really complicated, though, by the fact that Mass Eye and Ear did not have an otolaryngology department at this time, and that Mass Eye and Ear and Mass General Hospital, who are our neighbors, shared a lot of their ear, nose, and throat folks in this time period. So for the 1911 photo, which I'll focus on in a bit more depth, we were able to confirm that the two doctors were Isabel Kerr and Margaret Noyes Kleiner. We have been aware of them as the first and second women otolaryngologists hired at Mass Eye and Ear, but something was off here. The photo was taken more than a decade before our annual reports had ever recorded either of their presence on our staff, and they were also dated, again, before we had known of women surgeons working on the staff. After a bit of digging, we learned that Dr. Kleiner in particular had been an avid historian of women surgeons, and she had conducted a series of oral histories with her contemporaries that are preserved as transcripts at Harvard's Schlesinger Library. This collection also happened to include an interview with her colleague, Dr. Kerr. That interview helped us gain a lot of perspective on the two of them as people and the barriers they encountered as women surgeons in the early 1900s. When some women in medicine were shifting their perspective from maintaining separatism, as in women's hospitals and men's hospitals, to integrating with institutions that were previously only open to men. In fact, both were also were found to have been working at the New England Hospital for Women and Children at the time that they're pictured here. And this was information we were able to track down through digitized copies of New England Hospital's annual reports. So in interest of time, I don't want to spend too much time on this piece, but it really was one of our first super exciting finds that we made through our research. It encouraged us to question things that we thought we knew, and also really shift our perspectives in terms of how we think about firsts generally and going forward. As a shameless plug, I did write a more complete account of this story in the Harvard Library Bulletin. If you're interested, the link is included in the PowerPoint. So next, I'm going to touch a bit on the technical aspects. When we were thinking about this idea of open knowledge, one of the most important outcomes that we had in mind was making sure our finding aids were out in the world. Like many small archival repositories, our finding aids had previously lived as Word documents in an internal network drive, discoverable only to basically us. The archives were essentially invisible to outside researchers. We started working almost immediately with the Harvard Library team to figure out the logistics of getting up and running with archive space, which they were happy to help us with. At the time, we began working on getting set up to catalog in Alma as well. So together, access to ASpace and Alma would help us make these finding aids discoverable through Harvard's Hollis catalog, which would really be a game changer for us and for any researchers who might benefit from having access to this information. Getting up and running in these systems was an interesting challenge for our team, as our library and archives has traditionally operated pretty independently from the Harvard Library system. At first, we really weren't even sure what they would grant us use of, but Harvard Library was incredibly supportive of us and really wanted to help. The trick was just figuring out who could help and how, and communicating about our archives and our project to folks who weren't already familiar with us and our position in the Harvard community. It did take a while to work out the kinks, and getting set up for full use of archive space, Alma, and the digital repository service took us into a second round of grant funding in 2022. That said, I am very pleased to say that today, all of the records related to our project that we hoped to become discoverable through Hollis are now, that has been done. Our annual reports, resident and fellow yearbooks, and photograph collections in particular were really important for us, and I think of particular research interest. Today, we're still continuing to use archive space to make more of our collection searchable online. We're also hoping that now that our bicentennial year has concluded, we can pick up where we left off using the digital repository service to make digital objects available and ultimately launch the online exhibit that I had mentioned previously. So over our 2 years with the AOK grant, we worked on a lot of other projects that I think had a big impact on our community. I've listed just a few of them here, but in interest of time, I'll just highlight a couple. The work we were doing around diversity really resonated with our community, a community that looks a lot different than it did when the hospital was founded in 1824 and through much of the 20th century. This project gave us an opportunity to increase awareness and support for the archives as an essential part of our community. And I really think that played a large role in our ability to successfully advocate for creating a full-time archivist position at Mass Ioneer, which continues to be me, and I'm very grateful for. So in closing, I thought I'd just do some general takeaways and lessons learned. I know the landscape may have shifted for many of us since this chapter was written, but I still think, I believe that we should look for points of alignment and wider policies within our parent institutions that we can use to our advantage. Make it easy for the powers that be to see how your work supports their greater mission. For hospitals, efforts that work toward promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion not only have a profound impact on our clinicians and our staff, but on our patients. And that is always the bottom line here. I know we're living through, again, this moment, but I think if we get creative, we can hopefully keep pursuing these projects that I think are really important. Next, I would question any and all assumptions you're going into your project with. We had plenty of them, both in the facts of our history, as well as what we thought we were likely to receive in terms of resources. You don't get things you don't ask for. If you've asked in the past and heard a no, you can always ask again. I think it's worth taking the time. One thing I would assume in retrospect also is that things are going to take longer than you expect. We thought we left plenty of time for everything, but that was not the case, even though I think for the most part things went fairly smoothly. We were really grateful again to have chosen a grant where the team was really flexible with the deliverables and really wanted to see projects evolve and things like that. So I would definitely, keep an eye toward that in terms of, finding someone who's going to work with you and your limitations. And then finally, I just want to reemphasize that outreach was our greatest asset in this. I think doing the basic work of your grant project is obviously very important, but it's just as important to take the time to be present in your community. We said yes to a lot of projects. We did presentations and pop-up exhibits and blog posts and almost anything you can think of that our creative and thoughtful people in our community expressed an interest in as they learned more about what we were doing. You're not going to be able to do it all, but we really felt it was important to show up and be seen. While some of that time certainly could have been spent doing more of this basic research and technology sort of work, I think the outreach has really had a big impact in the long run in terms of sustaining use of the archives and I think just stakeholder buy-in. So yeah, I think it's this project, though it was small, it had a really big role in shaping what we believe our archival program can be to our hospital and our community. And so if anyone's interested in chatting about this work, you are welcome to contact me, ask questions now, but I'm always interested to talk if anyone reaches out by email. So thanks so much for having me again. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. We can go ahead and, pause here for if anyone has any questions they want to give to Vanessa. We have, like I mentioned, please put any questions into the Q&A or just other comments in the chat. But we'll give people a moment now in case anyone's typing and go from there.
Hi, this is Kate. I don't see any questions from any of the participants, but the panel had a question. I really appreciate the ending with this sort of practical tips. Thank you. That's really helpful. I think I turned off my camera accidentally. Are there any other thoughts you have for us if we're just at that point of even thinking about what hidden histories we might start looking for in our collections? Any kind of super beginner tips for that you might want to share?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It definitely can be difficult to figure out where to start. There's so much to go through. And, again, I spent a lot of time just like combing through collections for that we might want to follow. I will say for those of us, many of us working in academic settings or settings where we have like a large organization around us, we found also that tapping into just sort of word of mouth knowledge, institutional knowledge, really helped us get started in a lot of regards. When we talked to other people who had been in our organization for a long time that we were doing this, a lot of people had ideas about like, oh, I know that so-and-so was the first Black resident or, whatever it was. And then we had sort of this nut of information that we could follow up on, or maybe they knew someone who would want to talk to us about their experience. We did a little bit of that as well. But like some of these folks that we identified through that process weren't folks that were even in positions where they would have been recorded in some of these more formal methods, like an annual report. Like for instance, we talked to a notable doctor's longtime scrub nurse. It just wasn't the sort of, for a long time, it wasn't the practice that that level of staff was recorded in certain records. So it was just like this information that other people know that we didn't. So I would say like get out there and talk to people, I think is a good place to start. I hope that helps, but it is just like it's really difficult, and I think it's really individualized in some ways. We all have such unique settings, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but definitely tap into the old timers, the hive mind.
Yes,
Yeah.
you can find lots of good stuff, and people tend to have things squirreled away is the other thing.
Mm-hmm.
Many people
Mm-hmm.
have offices that are full of treasures that you don't know about,
Mm-hmm.
old newsletters, things like that. I've had a lot of fun with those.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for the question.
See any other questions from the group? I guess our other question from the panel is that figuring out the names and the where they were working of those two women surgeons, that was incredible. That must have been so exciting. I can see why that was your top like exciting discovery that you highlighted. Is there a number two? Like, is there another crumb you can give us from the table? Did you have a number two surprise?
Ooh, surprises.
Or exciting discoveries?
Or exciting discoveries. Yeah, I mean that I feel like was definitely our biggest one, just because it felt like it was sort of not only a cool discovery in and of itself, but sort of like a paradigm shift in a way where we were just like, okay, let's look into some of these things that we thought we knew the answer to. I think, I don't know if it was, well, so one of our projects we ended up working on was at the same time as we were working on this project, we were notified that also our ear, nose, and throat staff were sort of renovating this conference space, and they wanted to make this mural, and they wanted help identifying, people to highlight on the mural. So I ended up spending a very long time, literally just going through photographs and annual reports and just like trying to find out more information about individual people and seeing, going down to brass tacks in terms of, this person may have been the first Asian resident, the first Asian staff person, and then going into, reports of medical societies, things like that, to kind of try and triangulate information. So I think it was just pulling out, I think, a lot of individual pieces. That's a great question, though. I feel like I would have a more concrete one if I had more time to think. But I never thought about it.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's a great question. I've got to think more on that. But I think it was just like seeing, I don't know, because so many people have done such, they've had such interesting lives, and getting to, delve into folks who either I'd heard about a little bit or, maybe never at all, and finding out like, oh, look at all these like cool things they did with their lives and their career and their research. I think it was just really gratifying in that sense of just like, and then being able to share that with others. I think that was really fun.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. We do have a quick question in the chat, down kind of a down in the weeds question, they say.
Of course.
Did you get work release time to work on this project, or was this considered part of your workload in your job?
Yeah, great question. So again, when I started this, basically the very short version of the background is that I had been previously working part-time with Mass Pioneer on basically funded through the generosity of our library director and an IMLS grant to do a different project. So when we got this grant, the grant basically was, this was a grant that was able to pay for staffing. So that's pretty much the entirety of what our grant funding, the $10,000 per 6 months, paid for. So basically I was working on this, I can't remember the exact amount of hours a week, but whatever, it worked out to be, and that money went to my salary. Or salary at the time. So
Stipend.
yes, my stipend, exactly, much better word for it. So yes, the grant paid for staffing, and I know that isn't the case with all grants. We were also, again, very lucky to find this grant in the sense that that was something it would pay for. Because, other people, there were a lot of really interesting projects people were working on, but a lot of them, some of them were paying for, the implementation of a type of technology or, something like that, where there was something that wasn't staffing, whereas ours was really like, we want to get the research done, we want to just make stuff available online. So that seemed like the most natural point to be funding.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I think that is it for questions. Let me just double check. Yep. No more questions. Thank you so much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Appreciate it.
Yes, Vanessa, thank you so much for such a fascinating presentation. It sounds like such a cool project. I think we're gonna go ahead and just take a short break right now. Probably just give us maybe about 10 minutes just so everybody can get up, move around, run to the restroom if you need to. So let's say 10 minutes or about around. So let's see, it's 2:43 right now according to my clock. So let's say 2:55. We'll all reconvene. But for now we'll go ahead and give everyone just a short break. Then we'll come back for our other two presentations. Go ahead and get this up here. There it is. All right. Well, welcome Welcome back, everyone. I hope everybody had a good break. We're going to get going here again with Ian Post. He is the local history archivist at the Edward H. Knabb Research Center for Delmarva History and Culture at Salisbury University. He began his career in archives in Michigan before earning his master's in library and information science at Pratt Institute in New York City. And today, Ian is presenting Bridging Barriers to Accessibility of Sources on Delmarva's Black History through the Enduring Connections Digital History Project. So go ahead and take it away, Ian.
All right. Hi, everybody. It's a little odd being the only Michigander in a room full of Ohioans, but I'll make do. So, and let me see, is this showing up all right, the presentation?
Yes, we see it.
Perfect. All right, so I'm Ian Post. I'm the local history archivist here at the Knabb Research Center at SU, and we're located on the Delmarva Peninsula, which I'll talk a little bit more about. It's an area with a really unique history. So the Edward H. Knabb Research Center, we help create access for sources related to the Delmarva Peninsula, which is comprised of Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia, parts of it. So we're east of Baltimore, south of Philadelphia, and along the Atlantic coast. And the Knabb Center was founded in 1982 as sort of this home for Delmarva history. And it started by collecting microfilm court records and newspapers for these different jurisdictions as family members and researchers who are digging into this local history here found out as you had family moving across or forcibly moved across these state borders, you inevitably had to research records from different jurisdictions. So by centralizing those resources for Delaware families that would have had to have gone up to Dover, Maryland families that would go up to Annapolis, and Virginia families going all the way over to Richmond, all of which are several hour drives just to access records. By centralizing those records at the NAB Center in Salisbury here, it opened the doors for a lot of discovery. And in about 2019, as we were working on a number of different projects, like many of our other archivists here, I wear a lot of different hats, so the Enduring Connections Project is one small part of it. We recognized in a number of our research guides and published resources that were created by independent researchers that there were implicit biases in there and explicit ones. I've got a page up here from a transcription of 3 of our Maryland counties, Worcester, Somerset, and Wicomico, marriage records. And this research aid, that's a transcription index of marriage records, only recorded the white men and women of the area, even though the records themselves had people of color. So the exclusion here in these records, or in these transcriptions, created an additional barrier on top of the barrier of using records that were created by the very system that oppressed many of these people. Maryland was a slave state, as well as early on Delaware and Virginia, and has a rich Black history here, but you really have to read those sources against the grain to get into some of that. And so we launched and started working on the Enduring Connections Project, and we were kind of leveraged our resources during the pandemic, in that we had quite a bit of staff at the library here who weren't able to work remotely or didn't have projects that they could do remotely. And so we helped set up a number of different transcription projects for them to be able to help at home and complete work and get paid still while contributing transcriptions for the early stages of this Enduring Connections project. And you're seeing the website as it looks today, which is a searchable database at the core of the website with a couple other features that I'll talk about here. But just to emphasize the rich Black history of the area, folks from around the country will recognize names like Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, who were born on the peninsula here, as well as a number of people who have really close roots to here, like Brian Stevenson of EJIs from Milton, Delaware. James Baldwin's mother is from Deal Island on the Chesapeake Bay here, and Ta-Nehisi Coates' family is from the Berlin area, which is on the eastern shore, or the eastern part of Maryland here, the eastern shore of Maryland. So this region, although it's unique, or remote and rural, is unique in its rich Black history and connects a lot to later 19th century growing urban histories in Baltimore and Philadelphia and New York and throughout the area. So we always kind of say there's, all roads lead back to Delmarva for a lot of the country, and it's, specifically for a lot of Black communities around the country as people moved west. And so the database here, we've been working to transcribe, digitize, and make accessible sources in this database. And we've been working progressively through public records, things like censuses, voting registration documents, court records, as well as items from our own collections. So personal papers and other items here, family Bibles that oftentimes included names of enslaved people, and I'll highlight some of those. But along the way, we're working to create different points of access for researchers to be able to get into the records. One of the main ways that we kind of imagine are people typing in their last names simply, or the names of relatives they know, and using it for genealogical purposes. But also we've been seeing a lot of people use it to connect with the roots of their own community, and look at what early church and early school history was like before kind of the collective memory of elders currently. holds. And another way we've been thinking is if young students are thinking about communities and the different roles that people play in those, there's a lot of records that highlight different occupations for both free and enslaved people of color. And so in these records where there are occupations highlighted, we've created ways to link out to those records that highlight those occupations so that people can begin learning about some of the odd ones like cake baker and fiddler, the ones that I'm just really curious about, to ones that are really evocative of work and labor on the shore, like watermen, oystermen, and things like that. And the database is really the core of the project. There's 133 different sources in there currently from across the region, including both, again, Delaware and Virginia, as well as Maryland. But we have been working to highlight what sort of things can be found in these records. A lot of people, when we talk about the database, see a lot of names. It can look like a lot of words, a lot of names, and it's difficult to easily make meaning out of that. And so one of the things that we've really tried to focus on is helping students develop skills using this database. And so a number of our interns, we had for 3 different years, starting in 2022, we were part of the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture's Robert F. Smith internship program, where they placed interns around the country to work for 12 weeks over the summer at these different institutions. We were one of 9 sites selected, and we had 2 interns placed with us to work for 12 weeks. They got a really generous stipend, did a lot of networking events through the Smithsonian, and then gained hands-on experience doing transcription, digitization, and then culminating in what we call a story, a sort of mini exhibit curating things from their research and highlighting what other researchers can find in the database. So you're seeing a couple of those there. Rahana wrote about American colonization in Liberia, and Abdina Bari, who's now an archivist at Howard, she wrote about the Freedmen's Bureau and the Illegal Apprenticeships Program. And within those stories at the bottom, we link out to the different sources so that you can see how it can be demonstrated how these sources inform these stories and make meaning. And my part of this, the story that I have really kind of honed in on within the database is about a place called Brownsville. And that's really what I start out with in the chapter. And what you're seeing here is not a picture that I took. I claim no credit for that, although it's beautiful. Is Brownsville is on the eastern shore of Virginia. And it's along the longest part of undeveloped coastline on the Atlantic coast. And it's now protected by the Nature Conservancy. And one of my sort of side gigs during the pandemic was writing history articles for this popular lifestyle magazine down here on the shore called Coastal Style. They were just little kind of, I'd call them fluff pieces, but they were, nice little historical overviews of things. And I got really interested in Brownsville from this and started looking into and kind of seeing the glaring omission of the people of color and the enslaved people that worked the land and all of the histories there. And so I started to just dive headfirst into the history there of Brownsville. It's on the Delmarva Peninsula, although very southern part of it. So it really ties in with this history. And I wanted to know what were the African American community doing there at the time that all this other history is being presented and recorded. And sort of simultaneously as I was doing that, I was also looking for a case in the database or a source that would demonstrate why breaking down those geographical barriers are important, why having records from the eastern shore of Virginia accompanied by records from the eastern shore of Maryland would be valuable. And lo and behold, it actually connected to Brownsville. In the Somerset County, Maryland land records, there's a record in 1842 called a certificate of removal, where this man, William W. Handy, is moving enslaved people from the eastern shore of Virginia up to Princess Anne, which is in Maryland. And I noticed when I was reading that, the name John Upshur, which is connected to Brownsville. So a couple months go by as I'm researching this a bit more, and I learned that at William and Mary, there's Upshur family papers. The William and Mary Special Collections Research Center holds a huge collection of Upshur family papers. Would have been amazing to know about before I wrote the Coastal Style article, but so it goes with research. And part of that, there are 4 ledgers, and in one of those ledgers, there's a few pages that include almost 100 names of formerly enslaved people at the Brownsville plantation. And this was recorded by William B. Upshur. And it has been an invaluable resource for helping understand the relationships and the people who were enslaved at Brownsville. I've still been working with the Nature Conservancy to try and connect with descendants, share research, and help them along using this source. And we've had some really good luck with that. But using this, I've focused in on the people who are mentioned in that certificate of removal document and was able to start constructing a bit of a family tree to help understand this better as a family thing. We see a lot of times in the records that as the white families are coming together for things like marriages, it inextricably separates and sometimes changes forever the lives of the black families. And that's what happened there in 1835 and 1842 when William W. Handy married the daughter of John Upshur. And then later when John Upshur died, that caused huge movements and changes within the enslaved families, who were then moved across state lines, and the story goes on from there. And so focusing on 3 different people, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on this here right now, but in the chapter I do a little bit more, and if you want to just sit and chat about it, I'm happy to do that anytime, but there's always a lot more details that aren't included. But I focused on 3 different people that kind of have that are part of the same family that have 3 really different outcomes or stories that are really a part of the fabric of the American experience. Bridget was a matriarch, and she and her daughter are manumitted in 1848, which means freed, through land records. And her and her daughter after 1850, I cannot find in any record. So they sort of drop off. And this is where the database might help more by including more sources. We might be able to uncover a trail. But at the moment, with all of my searching, I have not found her and Sophia after their manumission. Ezekiel, on the other hand, is a son of Bridget, and he goes missing in a different way in a certain period of time. He shows up on the 1852 tax assessment of William W. Handy, but in 1857, he's not on the inventory. And the next time he shows up in any sort of written record is in 1863 in New Orleans, Louisiana, when he's enlisting in the U.S. Colored Troops. And he lives the rest of his life down there. There's no documentation of how he ended up down there. There should be a bill of sale, but the reverse Underground Railroad was very active on the Delmarva Peninsula, and that is a big possibility of what happened with him. But again, maybe more sources exist out in family lore that can be pulled on. Armistead is a little different, that he stayed here on the shore. He shows up later in voter registration records, and is the kind of person who would have lived potentially into the early 1900s, and somebody that would have shared memories and stories with people that could be around today or have had parents and grandparents who have. And so each of these 3 kind of highlight different complexities within this research, as well as, again, different parts of the American fabric of this experience here. And one thing with this, I'm highlighting also the gaps in my own research here and the troubles that I've had. This database doesn't do everything for you. It's not super powerful with algorithms like family search and ancestry. So some people might find limitations in that, but it streamlines research in extreme ways. Whereas you would have been spending a lot of time cranking through microfilm, records that are hard to access and discover, especially remotely, are now searchable and accessible online. So looking to the future, we're continuing to transcribe, digitize, and add new sources. Unfortunately, the Robert F. Smith internship program was discontinued. You see a couple pictures of our interns there working throughout the summer, different summers there. And we're continuing to make meaningful collaborations with other institutions. So the Chesapeake Heartland Project up at Washington College, which grew out of a Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture project, is an amazing grassroots archive that they've been working up in Kent County on. And as they expand and we expand, we're seeking kind of these points for collaboration. And finding more opportunities for student researchers and genealogists to help make these discoveries and make those discoveries public about what they're finding in there and why it's useful, and continuing to support independent researchers. So the database has been amazing, and kind of what I end the chapter on is talking about it being used as a training tool itself to help launch the careers of future Black history preservationists. It has given the opportunity for students to get hands-on work through digitizing, transcribing, researching, and just simply familiarity with historical records and historical trends, and given them a platform to publish a small piece about that and share those stories. So the goal of the project, again, is to kind of break down those barriers, both within research and for the future of this research, and putting the resources into the hands of the community for them to make meaning of it. And with that, I'll open for questions.
Yes, just a reminder to everyone, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box, and then we will read those out.
While we're waiting on some questions from participants, I'll ask a question from the panel. What are some of the biggest challenges in identifying and compiling records for the Enduring Connections project?
Yeah, so one of the biggest challenges, less so in identifying records, we work really closely with a lot of these records anyways, and a lot of it's just taking it and reading against the grain on some inventories and wills and things. But technologically, there are some challenges here. This project exists on our library application server, our libapp server, and was developed entirely in collaboration with our technology librarian who works in-house. He developed our finding aid portal and our online exhibit tool using Omeka. And so this is a homegrown database and website. And Chris, who's our technology librarian, does amazing work. But we don't have any sort of support with either a bigger company or things like you have server hosting and other stuff like that. So we don't have that kind of support. There's not like pop-ups when we have errors that come up. So sometimes we're left scratching our head about finding a bug in the database and doing that sort of management. But on the other hand, we also have a lot of freedom with that. So while it presents those kinds of challenges with support, we also have a lot of freedom with how we want to develop things and add new features or just quickly change something. I mean, I noticed an error this morning that something wasn't loading, and I quick put in something, a ticket on GitHub, and Chris fixed it within minutes. And that would not have been the case if I had to reach out to a corporation, get on the line with a customer representative, and go through all of that. So There's real advantages to having that kind of small and in-house, but also kind of severe limitations. But also just one last thing with that, we created it to have a simple backbone so that if and when we eventually migrate, collaborate, or do something with other institutions in a much bigger way, all the data in here are saved in CSV file format. So there's nothing super complex about the data here. Again, that's more limitations on parts of it, with especially hosting digital items and things like that. But that future migration will hopefully, fingers crossed, be a lot easier because of that.
Great. And then a question from a participant. How has this project impacted your institution's collecting practices, if it has? Also, have you been able to track down any descendants of the families you have researched through the project?
Yeah, I'll answer the second one first here. Yes, very excitingly, we've made connections with two different separate lines of family. One who she grew up out in Kansas, and her family ended up out that way. And she's living in the DC region, and she found an article written by the Nature Conservancy's intern, Vanessa Moses, who I cite in the chapter. She's often working for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation now and doing great work. But she wrote an article about her experience and finding her own history as she was doing this Black history research. And that article led Andrea, the descendant, to reach out to us. And, we really have been able to help her kind of dive into some of this family history. Separately, there are two other lines, one that I haven't met, a line of family that has worked closely with the folks down at the Nature Conservancy, and then one other line of family that ended up, some of them in New York City, and a few of them still live on the eastern shore of Virginia, whose roots actually predate the ledger. So their family comes from Brownsville, but were either free or off of the Brownsville plantation by the time the ledger was starting to be used. So there's a little bit more difficulty there with that. Can you remind me of the first question again about the?
Yes, how has this project impacted your
collecting.
institution's collecting practices?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a part of our collecting in that we, have been seeking out those digital types of sources, but our archival collecting, kind of remains the same, and in that we've, identified gaps within our archives, and that work was ongoing before this database within our archival collections, and we've worked with a number of different groups to try and help get their collections here and preserved at the NAB Center. This is a digital history project, so it's a little, we've got things within our own collections. There's a lot of room for us to grow our Black history sources. And that's, again, something we were working on before and trying to grow. So I'd say, this helps us a bit in raising our visibility and people understanding that we are interested in preserving Black history. But the hard work of collecting and gaining the trust of communities is something that we've been working on before and will continue working on after this database.
Great. And then another question from the panel. What advice would you give to archivists looking to do similar digital history projects in their communities?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is giving people something to show, or giving something for them to see how they can make meaning out of things like this. A lot of the time, we're all interested in history here, but most people aren't generally, or they, if they are interested, they don't have that kind of hook. And I think stories and finding things that resonate with people, even if they seem odd to us or not super interesting, finding that hook for people can really get them, down the rabbit hole. I've seen that with a number of students in this, and I teach a lot of undergraduate classes and try and talk about the database in there and get students to use it, and finding the right hook. I mean, talking about the cake baker, I've gotten a couple students interested in using the database. There's 4 free Black cake bakers in the 1850s living on the eastern shore of Virginia, which is a very rural area. So I want to know more about them. And I think other people, when you just mention that fact that, like, you know, during the pandemic, especially, I was like, hey, you all bake cakes. Finding that hook to get them interested, even if it's the odd thing, I think is really valuable and helps pull more stakeholders in for the future.
Thank you so much, Ian. I'm going to go ahead and show again really quick. All right, go ahead, Christine.
Okay, so our last speaker for today is Jocelyn Robinson, who is the director of the Center for Radio Preservation and Archives at WYSO Public Radio in Yellow Springs. And here she produces the podcast Rediscovered Radio, Women's Voices, Women's Music in the WYSO Archives. In addition, she is the founder and director of the HBCU Radio Preservation Project and serves on the African American and Civil Rights Radio Caucus of the Radio Preservation Task Force at the Library of Congress. She is board president of the Chicago-based Third Coast International Audio Festival, which is the longest-running celebration of audio storytelling in the U.S. Jocelyn holds a master's degree in cultural studies from Antioch University and a graduate certificate in archives and records management from Wright State University. Today, she's sharing with us Lifting Every Voice, Preserving Black College Radio in an Era of Erasure. Jocelyn, we'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. Ian, would you stop sharing? Or whoever it is?
I just did. You should be good.
Okay, great. Thanks. Let me get this up here for you. Okay, so thanks for having me here today. I want to thank Vanessa and Ian for their presentations, because what's kind of cool is we're all sort of connected, kind of part of the same fabric, as you'll hear when I go through this presentation. You know, I am the Director of Radio Preservation and Archives at WYSO, and that has a wonderful story that I love to tell about rediscovered radio. But today I'm going to talk about my work as the founder and director of the HBCU Radio Preservation Project, which is an effort which unapologetically seeks to enrich and broaden the multivocal cultural record. So in this presentation, I'm going to tell the origin story of the project and give some insights into what we do and how we do it. And my hope is that you'll come away with a little inspiration and a few concrete strategies for continuing our collective work in preserving and learning from the past in this era of erasure. So as of today, the HBCU Radio Preservation Project is the recipient of over $5 million in support from the Mellon Foundation, which will take us through 2027. It's a big project with a lot of moving parts, but it had rather humble beginnings. Its roots are in the Association of African American Museums annual meeting held in Washington, D.C. in 2017. At that conference, I presented on a panel about preserving radio broadcasts featuring Black voices. I spoke about the civil rights and Vietnam era archival audio, the rediscovered radio I work with at the WYSO Archives. I'm a preservationist and a content creator as a producer at the radio station. WYSO's guiding principles explicitly state that, quote, WYSO has a role to play in undoing centuries of inequality, end quote, and we do this in part by, quote, amplifying voices that have been historically excluded, end quote. Also, preservation is one of our core values. WYSO has a large reel-to-reel tape collection going back to its founding in 1958, and it contains many vibrant African-American voices of both local and national importance. And in many ways, WYSO is the inspiration and model for all that follows. So at that AAAM conference, my colleagues and I talked about the critical need for preservation of Black voices. But the media that holds these voices itself needs preservation too. And y'all know that old magnetic media and transitional formats are at risk of being lost to time, to degradation and neglect. And digital media require special care too. So during the Q&A, I mentioned I was curious about what hidden gems might be found at HBCU radio stations, as we'd found so many at WYSO. Prior to quitting my day job in 2015, to become a radio producer, I was the Title III grant director for 8 years at Central State University in Wilberforce, Ohio. Central is the home of WCSU, the first HBCU radio station licensed by the FCC back in 1962, and I was aware that many historically Black colleges have radio stations. Out of 104, almost a third do. So after that conference, I had the chance to begin satisfying my curiosity. I applied for modest funding from the National Recording Preservation Foundation, grant maker for the National Recording Preservation Board at the Library of Congress. They've just opened a new grant cycle, so y'all should check it out. I proposed a survey of the HBCU stations to ascertain the content and condition of any archival collections they might have to try and find those hidden gems. So Miami Valley Public Media, the umbrella organization for WYSO, and what is now the Center for Radio Preservation and Archives, graciously became the fiscal and administrative home of the project. With input from Sheila Darrow, then Central State's archivist, and Dr. Robert Franklin, then WCSU's station manager, over the next 2 years, I designed and administered the survey, built profiles of the stations, and performed site visits at a handful of them. We also provided a small amount of mini grant funds to help the stations with emergency preservation needs like shelving and archival boxes. Many different formats were found at the stations visited. I also found lots of vinyl record albums and legacy equipment, vital to playback of old formats. The conditions of the materials varied, but few station folks had any knowledge of the content on the old cassettes or floppy disks and such. And virtually none of the old media were on the radar of the SCA folks on campus. So I encourage you, if you have a radio station on your campus, that you develop a relationship with them if you don't have one already. So when I wrote the report at the close of the funding period, I made a series of recommendations for a subsequent phase of the project, as I'd learned a lot about the stations and their preservation needs. I suggested workshops in preservation planning, collections management, and digital preservation, as today's digital content is tomorrow's archival material. I also suggested oral history training. Many stations have scant analog material, but they are rich in memory with folks still living who helped start the station or who'd worked at it for many years, folks who know well its impact on campus and community. It's important to collect and preserve their stories before they pass on and these histories with them. And I recommended support for emergency preparedness, since climate change is a particular threat to schools in Hurricane Alley, where many HBCUs are located. As someone who works with historical audio, who has a little archival training as well as a background in the Black museums field from way back when, I knew that the radio station staff needed to connect with the preservation experts already on their campuses, with the institutional archivists at their libraries and special collections. Such internal partnerships would contribute to capacity building that would then foster sustainability of radio preservation efforts. Around this time, it's late 2019, I was contacted by a journalist with the Chronicle of Higher Education who'd caught wind of the project and who happened to be a Florida A&M University alumna. She wrote a feature published in January of 2020 that a lot of people saw, and one of them was Bill Vayette, director of the Northeast Document Conservation Center in Andover, Massachusetts. Bill convinced me to partner with NEDCC to take the project to its next phase, to operationalize the recommendations from the NRPF final report. With an inside track to a major funder, he pushed the snowball down the hill, and later that year, we were working with a Mellon Foundation program officer on a proposal for a planning grant. And if you attended the SOA conference last week, you heard Patricia Sway, my program officer. You heard her keynote address Friday morning, and she is simply awesome. So collaborating closely with my NEDCC colleagues, Anne Marie Willer, Director of Preservation Services, and Bryce Rowe, Director of Audio Preservation Services, we got to work on the second phase, the HBCU Radio Preservation Pilot Project. The goals of the project were, and still are, to foster an ethos of preservation at HBCU state radio stations, to preserve the station's audio collections, and to facilitate capacity building and sustainability through connecting and supporting the stations and the institutional archives on campus. So using resources and expertise at both WYSO and NEDCC, we designed the pilot project to engage 4 of the stations at schools that had completed the survey and which I had visited. WRVS at Elizabeth City State University, WFSK at Fisk, WHCJ in Savannah State, and that's the general manager, Grace Curry there in the photo, and South Carolina State University. WSSB is the only jazz formatted station in the state. So we also pulled in Clark Atlanta University and WCLK as leadership partners. The Robert W. Woodruff Library at the Atlanta University Center is unique in that it is a consortium of Spelman College, Morehouse College, and Clark Atlanta University. So it has resources beyond what many single college libraries have. And the radio station, WCLK, is a big player in the major broadcast market of Atlanta. So these 5 helped us design a project that could be shared with the entire community of HBCU radio stations and serve as a model for other stations too. So to the pilot schools, we provided workshops, conducted collections assessments, provided funds for SAA memberships and conference travel, convened quarterly meetings, coaching sessions, and much more. The grant made it possible for us to continue collecting survey responses and to visit the remaining HBCU campuses with radio stations. And we held our first symposium on Black college radio at Clark Atlanta in 2022. Also, as part of the pilot activities, I conducted our first oral history interview with David C. Linton, the program director at WCLK at Clark Atlanta. Mr. Linton came up at WSHA at Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina, and later helped launch WRVS at Elizabeth City State in 1985. WSHA went on the air in 1968, but it is no longer broadcasting. Note that not only are HBCU radio materials at risk, but sometimes the very existence of the radio station is too. FCC licenses are assets that can be sold to keep a struggling college afloat, which was the case at Shaw in 2018. There is much to preserve from its presence and impact, and we have added WSHA and Shaw to the project roster, and it's not the only one. There are other HBCUs that once had radio stations that no longer do, as we are discovering, and we're hoping to expand the scope of the project to include them. So I want to share with you our ethos as a project, as preservationists, as heritage workers, as culture keepers. We are individuals who recognize the value and contributions of HBCUs and how sacred and important they are to Black people and to this country. And we deeply understand their precarity in the present moment. We come to this work with the clear understanding that we need to infuse rather than extract, that we need to provide people power, that we must meet the radio stations and institutional archives where they are, that there may be a lack of time and resources on many campuses, but not a lack of qualifications, capabilities, or commitment. With this ethos, with our commitment and understanding, we've gathered a combined team of nearly a dozen people that includes audio preservationists, oral historians, and field archivists, among others. And we've identified 3 components, 3 intertwining elements to comprise the structure of the project going forward into the 3rd phase, implementation. The elements are training and education, preservation, and public history. And under training and education, we provide an array of preservation training resources and workshops for campus stations, archivists, and community members. And those of you who know of the work that NEDCC does, you know that they've been invaluable with that. Each year, we also hire a recent master's graduate as a year-long fellow, as well as a graduate summer intern. We provide these early career professionals with mentoring and opportunities to learn from experienced practitioners in order to help infuse new energy into the profession. And we do our best to recruit HBCU graduates for these roles. And note that they're all graduate students. The Smith program worked with undergrads, and they weren't necessarily folks who were interested in preservation or archival careers, but we've taken it upon ourselves to work with folks who are young people who are already making a commitment to the profession. So then there's preservation. Our 2 field archivists, along with other NEDCC staff and our fellow and intern, collaborate with stations and campus archivists on collections assessments and follow-up field services such as inventories, rehousing, and then of course reformatting and other preservation activities. And then through public history praxis, our oral historian, our fellow and intern conduct interviews to document the histories of the stations. We offer training in oral history and in using historical audio and content creation, which is my area of expertise. Our public history praxis includes an array of activities, which you'll hear about shortly, and we convene an annual symposium. Last year's was held at Shaw University. Project team members conduct frequent public presentations like this one today, and we have several writing projects in the works. We're planning to expand the team by adding a public historian with digital humanities expertise later this summer, and we work with a fabulous advisory group with connections to HBCUs and the history discipline to help us network and identify opportunities. Like I said, a lot of moving parts. Now, let me tell you specifically how we preserve HBCU radio and its legacy. We begin with site visits with members of our team arriving on campus to meet radio station staff and the archivist or those charged with managing institutional archives or special collections. We assess campus needs and begin building relationships. Sometime later, we'll conduct a preservation visit, again in collaboration with the station manager and archivist. Our field archivists assess and inventory materials, which might include legacy equipment, DATs, reel-to-reels, carts, cassettes, or CDs. A determination is made about which materials might be shipped to NEDCC for digitization using criteria established with the institution. They also determine if the digital files are to be discoverable and accessible via their own collections or through our partnership with the American Archive of Public Broadcasting at the Library of Congress and GBH, or through the HBCU Library Alliance or others. We actively support the institutions in having full control of their historical materials. So note that the HBCU Radio Preservation Project is not a repository for the historical audio. While the preservation folk are hard at it, other team members are conducting oral histories based on guidance from the station manager and archivist. We interview current and former students, honor our personalities and station staff, as well as community members with ties to the station. Once transcribed, the interviews are sent to the official repository for the project's oral history collection, the Margaret Walker Center at Jackson State University in Mississippi, where they are accessible on the center's YouTube channel. And I believe to date, we have about 45 that have been recorded, and there are currently upwards of 30 interviews available. So one of our pilot schools, Elizabeth City State University in the far northeast corner of North Carolina, has been an incredible partner in the transition from pilot to implementation. I'll use them as an example of how the project works. Here's station manager Melba Smith, whose oral history is in our collection at the Margaret Walker Center. And here you can see what we've collected and what we've done with it. She and her colleague at the library, archivist Paige Hendrickson, who's in that little bubble there on the end, they helped us develop this process map for radio preservation. So I'm going to play a short montage of some of the material we preserved together. Some of it dates back into the late 1990s to early 2000s, and it's a little teeny snapshot of life at Elizabeth City State University.
89.9 ECSU, listener-supported public radio. We're WRVS-FM, Elizabeth City, North Carolina, Elizabeth City State University.
I'm Randy Jones. Good morning. Coming live to you here from Roebuck Stadium as we are celebrating the 136th commencement convocation here on the campus of Elizabeth City State University. Once again, I'm Randy Jones, and we will be bringing you the speech by our keynote speaker for the day will be Mr. Benjamin Ruffin. And also we'll give you a musical selection or two here from our university choir. So right now we are moving very rapidly through the program. Clouds are becoming a little time out here momentarily. And the ball is stolen away by 42. Johnson. Johnson's shot is up, and it is good. 49-28 now. Lady Tigers of St. Paul's. Coach, you got to respect them. A little bit of fight here. And we'll have a timeout on the floor. So nice run that time by the Lady Tigers as Coach Serena King took a quick timeout here early to try to get her girls back. It was 46-16 at one point in time. And now Lady Tigers.
They've come back and scored. They're not giving up.
No, Coach. They have went on a quick 12-3 run here as they made it now a 49-28 game. Got a 30.
This is Success Fest on WRVS FM, Elizabeth City, North Carolina. Elizabeth City State University.
The effect that radio and television programming have on the way people think and how people behave in our society today is mind-boggling. The media has in many respects taken over the role that family once had in shaping our lives. The media today is the most powerful socializing tool in our society. It affects the way we think. It affects our behavior. It affects our opinions. It actually sets the boundaries for what's considered socially acceptable. Few stations seem to take their responsibility seriously. Well, here at 89.9, we take our obligation to create a better community to heart. We may not have all the answers, but you won't hear offensive music on our air. And the station policy, we just don't play music that disrespects our community.
So that was Melba's voice there at the end, very early in her career, over 20 years ago. So in addition to the pilot schools, we're currently working with HBCUs throughout North Carolina, which has become our eastern hub because of the number of institutions with radio stations there. In June, the team will work their way up the eastern seaboard from coastal Virginia to Baltimore, up through the Delmarva Peninsula. The team will work their way up there and conduct site visits at 5 more schools. And just the week before that, the week before last, almost the entire team met in Ohio for a planning and training and a preservation visit at WCSU at Central State University. It was super exciting because we were led to believe through the survey that there was little to no material to be preserved. But as you can see by their faces, happy faces, when a bunch of radio preservationists descend on your station, if there's anything to be found, we'll find it. So yeah, that was a pretty exciting moment because we ended up with the number of media that you see there, which we had no idea we would come away with. So one of the oral histories gathered recently was especially significant in this situation. Our oral historian interviewed former Central State University President John Garland. He says a lot about why this project is so important, and he serves on our advisory group, so he's a fan. We're making slow, steady progress on the preservation side and with our oral history component, but there is more, as I alluded earlier. Our first podcast episode just dropped on May 12th. Here's our fellow, Olivia Green, a graduate of Howard University and NYU, with a little bit of HBCU radio history.
While commercial radio began flourishing in the 1920s, HBCUs wouldn't establish their own stations until after World War II. The pioneering HBCU stations emerged in a period where segregation still dominated American life, creating crucial platforms for Black voices, music, and perspectives. Central State University in Ohio was among the early HBCUs to establish campus radio operations when WCSU began broadcasting in the early 60s. Several other pioneering HBCU radio stations soon followed, including WHOV at Hampton Institute, now Hampton University, which received its FCC license in 1964 after operating via carrier current since the 1940s. This tradition of HBCU radio excellence continued with stations like WANM at Florida A&M University and KTSU at Texas Southern University, providing important platforms for student voices and community engagement. These young stations, often powered by ambitious students and impassioned faculty, faced enormous challenges. First, there were the technical and financial hurdles. The FCC's licensing requirements demanded substantial capital investment and technical expertise. Many HBCUs operated on shoestring budgets, and so establishing a radio station required not just a transmitter and expensive studio equipment, but also trained personnel. HBCU stations had to carefully navigate the racial politics of their era. Although these obstacles persisted, by the 1970s, dozens of HBCUs had established radio stations. The Public Broadcasting Act of 1967 provided crucial funding that helped many institutions upgrade their facilities or establish new stations. This legislation, alongside the broader civil rights movement, created openings for Black institutions to claim space on the airwaves.
So if you'd like to hear more, subscribe to Broadcasting History wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be producing at least 6 episodes each year for the remainder of the grant. We've got a new website under construction too, though we currently have a page on WYSO's website. When our site launches this fall, you'll find an interactive map, archival audio, oral histories, blogs, photo galleries, preservation resources, and more. So go to wyso.org under the preservation tab and sign up for our newsletter, and you'll be in the know. Now, in addition to the HBCUs that I mentioned earlier, we're also beginning work with these 2 stations in Texas, both located in the Houston area, where several members of our team reside. We're building a hub there, just like we've done in North Carolina, to attend to institutions in the Western region. And this is significant because Houston will be the site of our next Black College Radio Symposium this November. So here's how you can find us and stay in touch. You can follow us on social media. You can sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to our podcast. But through collaboration and partnership, we've designed what we hope is a replicable model that can serve not only HBCUs, but ultimately any college radio station or tribal station or rural station or other public and community stations. And we like to think that in doing this, we're making good trouble in this fraught time. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Wow, what an incredible project. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Waiting for questions from the audience. We do have a question from the panel. We're curious about kind of how you approach institutions about becoming part of this preservation project. Have you had any concerns or pushbacks about places having the staff time, resources, et cetera, to be involved? And then kind of the continuing care of the collections that would follow that.
Okay, that's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, sorry.
It's okay, that's okay. Well, the genesis of the project really set me up by administering a survey, which I started doing in 2018, 2019. It gave me the opportunity to find out who the players were. And I started with the radio stations. I didn't really start connecting the radio stations and the institutional archives until I started doing site visits. And the first one I did was at Clark Atlanta. And if you know the Atlanta University Center at all, the research center is up on the top floor, and unbeknownst to me, the radio station WCLK is on the bottom floor of that same building that Robert W. Woodruff Library is in. They had never spoken. And here they are in the same building. But I mean, we're talking about a consortium of 3 schools. So, you know, that's not that unusual, I would guess. But what I learned as I was going along was I got to connect these people, because each campus has an archivist or someone who's charged with working with the the cultural materials and historical materials of the institution. And that's a good place to start, because working as a Title III director, I know how fraught the library situation is and how under-resourced HBCU libraries are. And so putting them together was really important. So it was just building blocks. Once I had that database and once I knew who to talk with and got a little bit more funding through the a lot more funding through the Mellon Foundation so that we could start communicating with folks and inviting them in. And so, you know, my assessments when I was doing site visits really helped point me to those institutions that I knew were ready to invite in to serve as models for others as the project, you know, developed. So that's pretty much how that happened. And because we've had the opportunity to learn as we're going, knowing what kinds of support the institutions need from us, and those warm bodies that we're bringing to campus and developing relationships and becoming partners with institutions, and also developing external partnerships to the project that can provide resources like the American Archive of Public Broadcasting, like the Harvard Digital Initiative through the HBCU Library Alliance. So, you know, the takeaways that I offer are really about, and I think that, you know, Vanessa hit it earlier when it's outreach and making sure that you are connecting with people and, you know, presenting at a conference and finding somebody who's like-minded and coming together and figuring out how you can help each other is, you know, something that I've been doing for a long time. And that's one of the things that's really helped this project along. So collections wise, it's, you know, we're very careful to make sure that the institutions have control of their materials and that they're not being sucked up and sucked away. Of course, at this point, they would have been sucked up and sucked away and then probably discarded because of what's going on in our cultural, you know, world right at the moment, but in our preservation institutions. So, you know, that's just been I think something that we've been very committed to making sure is that that it depends on what they need. We're there to help with it, whether it's advice, whether it's helping write a grant, whether it's writing letters of support, whether it's, you know, if anybody's had an NADCC assessment, you know that their reports, assessment reports are comprehensive. They give you lots of recommendations and suggestions. And that's what we've been able to do with all of the institutions that we work with closely.
Wow, yeah, that's amazing. Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. We have an interesting question from the group. First, they say, thank you so much for sharing your work on this amazing project. You've touched on this a little bit, but what has been the response of current students working at the stations and also alumni whom you've interviewed for the oral histories? Just kind of curious about their reaction, their response.
You know, undergraduate students in mass communications are not thinking about preservation. and most radio station staff are not thinking about preservation. So one of the things that we do by being content creators ourselves is engaging folks in, and that's where the public history praxis element of the project comes in. I mean, the training and education and the preservation itself, you know, everything's kind of, like I said, intertwined, but it's really the public history praxis that gives people an opportunity to see, here's how you can use this material. Here's what the value of this material is to your campus, to your community, because radio serves beyond the campus. And also, and as is the case at many college radio stations, student involvement is minimal. There are professional on-air talent, there are volunteers. It really depends on the station, because just like with HBCUs, they're large and small, and you know, they're some of them are NPR affiliates, many are not. But you know, student involvement just varies, but they get excited about it. So the two students are former students, the young professionals that we're working with right now, both have master's degrees, both attended HBCUs for their undergrad, both are journalism majors. So one of the things we're doing, whereas last year they were both you know, history and public history students. This year, with having journalism students, they're really engaged in content creation, but they're also taking this ethos back into the profession when they leave us. And, it's sort of like Johnny Appleseed, we're planting trees and hoping that they'll bear fruit, in the future, because we have an awareness that they don't have now. Oh, and community members and alumni, everybody remembers their glory days if that's what they were, and wants to contribute to an effort to celebrate that. So, we've had overwhelmingly positive responses from folks. Although I will say, because of the difficult situation at WSHA and Shaw University, there is a group of people who, they're not angry at us, but they're heartbroken that the institution sold their radio station license and closed their radio station. So, sometimes there are complicated stories that go along with the history, but for the most part, for us, for the project itself, it's been overwhelmingly positive.
That's fantastic. Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks so much. And I think we're just at about time. So I don't know if you want to wrap up with closing words, Candace and Christine.
Yes, so again, a huge thank you to all of our speakers for their wonderful presentations, as well as to all of the attendees for your interest in our event. Just as a reminder, this session was recorded, and we will be sharing the recording out with everyone who registered once we have it available. So if you need to revisit it, or you need to follow up with any of the speakers with questions, we hope that you've really enjoyed today, and we thank you all for your participation.